All right, welcome into the next installment of our DNVR Draft Day Live preview series. Nice. Talking about, I don't know, a less exciting scenario, obviously, than the trade-up, but maybe what could end up being the best situation for the Broncos. Yep. And that, of course, is the opportunity to trade back. Now, in the first video when we talked about 9, we discussed how the way we expect the board to fall, there's no can't miss, gotta have this guy, best player available type picks, we think. So if the Broncos find themselves in that scenario, there's a couple of really good wide receivers on the board. There really could be a chance where a team from behind them wants to trade up desperately. So the question I want to start with you guys with is this, Dre. Would you rather trade back to 15 with the Patriots or in that area and net a second? Or would you rather go back into the 20s with someone like the Bears and end up with a first?
Yeah, to me, it's without a doubt going back to the 20s and netting an extra first. I think, between 15 and 20, you're not going to lose out on too much. It really sets up it. There are a lot of scenarios where you're stuck at 9 if guys don't, things don't fall your way. But then from 9 to 20, you have so many options at right tackle, at cornerback, at edge rusher, at linebacker, that you're happy with whoever's going to fall to you. You're going to have extra value later on to maybe pick up a running back or some other stud prospect, an interior defensive lineman. So, yeah, adding an extra first for just a 5-pick difference would be huge.
You mean to fall back 5 further?
Right.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm right there too. I think when we talked about this on the draft podcast, I said ideally you get back to at least 18 and hopefully further back than that. Just because that's the lull in this draft. And I think even in the second round you find more you like. Yeah. And so even if you did trade way back and trade down again, I think that it starts to fill back up again as you get into the late first, in through the second. And so definitely I would take the first. And on top of that, I want to add, if you get that extra first next year instead of this year, that to me I think is the dream scenario, because then if things don't go well this year with Drew, you have the extra ammo to trade up next year. If things don't go well for Drew, right? Exactly. Yeah. You're probably 12, 13, and then you have an extra, if you're trading down to 20, something right around 20, that gets you in the top 10. There will be good quarterbacks there.
Yeah, that is, having 12 and let's say 23 can get you just about as high as you need to go.
Because you can trade future first too if you wanted to.
Exactly. No. And this is such an interesting place for me. So George Paton has talked a lot about draft and develop. And while I do think there's a very good chance he trades up and finds his quarterback, and he's got 6 years, he's starting that clock early because he knows if you miss on a first round quarterback, it's going to set you back probably 3 years. Yeah. He'll probably have another chance to fix that wrong if he messes this first one up. Hopefully he doesn't. But I also think there's a chance that he trades back and just starts stacking capital.
Right.
I could see him trade back twice in the first round. I could see him trade back to 20 and then, all the way out of the first round again. I could see those sort of things in just piling up draft picks as he says, look, I need ammunition to get this thing built up the way I want to do it. And he put himself in a position, as we know in free agency, where you're not saying we have to get X, Y, or Z. So you start stacking capital, you start, just building up. And when you talk about trade backs, I think it's always a little bit of a bummer for the fans. Yeah. You have a top 10 pick. You should be able to get a really elite talent with that. But if you think about the last time they did this, they were at 10, right?
Yep.
They went to 20. Is that where they got Noah Fant?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they didn't get a first out of that trade back because it wasn't for a quarterback, which always, hurts the payout. But what they ended up getting out of it was Noah Fant, Drew Lock, and Lloyd Cushenberry.
Not bad at all.
Now, Drew is obviously the swing player in that whole thing, but even just Noah Fant and Lloyd Cushenberry, two starters who you expect to be long-term starters for this team, for Devin Bush, essentially, I think is a trade that is close without the Drew Lock.
Yeah,
and Drew, in this scenario, especially if you're trading back, you're not trading up to get a quarterback, Drew still has a chance to pan out for you. He's still going to get another year this year. First time getting a second year in the system in the NFL. So those trade backs are always not so juicy.
Yeah.
But when you end up looking back at them 2-3 years down the road, you say, man, we got a lot out of that.
Yeah, and when you look at, just go a little bit deeper into that Fant trade, they could have gotten Devin Bush at 10. The next guys who got picked, though, the other guys who would have been in consideration for the Broncos, Jonah Williams, Rashawn Gary, Christian Wilkins, Chris Lindstrom, Dwayne Haskins, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Garrett Bradbury, Jeffrey Simmons, and then you have Noah Fant. Like, it's not like they all of a sudden were like, oh, these are the can't-miss guys. Like, they were very right to do that, and I think more often than not when you trade down, I mean, the numbers, the economics, like, economists have studied this stuff. You are much better off trading down on every single pick in the long run.
Wow, that just blew my mind. If you ranked the players drafted between 10 and 20, where does Noah Fant come up? Top
Probably
three?
Behind Burns?
Yeah,
behind Bush?
Burns and Simmons, maybe.
Simmons, yeah. I mean,
I think
it's
Bush
very
is probably
easy.
a conversation.
Yeah.
So he's in the top 4 of, wow, that's...
Yeah.
I'm
And see,
impressed.
that is the thing, though, is we can sit here and say, if you're picking at 9, JOK might be the pick. He could fall to 15. He could fall to 19. I think he could fall into the 20s. And he could be right there. There will be good players who you like in the early teens. They're in the 20s. The question, though, is will the Broncos actually take one of those guys? Because it seems like whenever you wind up in one of these situations, you say, hey, there's 6 guys I personally like, and that means if we trade down to 18, we're probably going to get one of them. Odds are the Broncos aren't going to take one of those guys when they trade down, and that's always the killer to me when they make a move like that.
Yeah, really interesting. If they trade down, who are you looking at?
As far as realistic targets, so I think Surtain, I think Aziz Ojulari, the talented edge rusher out of Georgia, should be gone. Honestly, I'd go O-line. If you're making this move, it's not just a trade down and accumulating more assets. It's trying to maximize the assets you have on your team, and that starts with Drew Lock. So giving him that right tackle protector, I think, would be huge. That was such a liability. They couldn't figure out how to stop or, how to block blitzes last year. Give him that peace of mind with one of the more talented athletes at right tackle. Should help the run game, should help Lock in the passing game. That's where I'd go.
Absolutely. And I think offensive line is a very good place to look. I brought up Elijah Vera Tucker at 9, the offensive lineman from USC. I think that he played right tackle at USC. He's played guard. He can do either one. I think that a guy like that you bring in and say, maybe he beats out Juwan James. Maybe he beats out Lloyd Cushenberry. Maybe he beats out Graham Glasgow. But he's providing competition. You have Netane Moody, who I think is going to be doing the exact same thing. Even at right tackle, I think that there's a conversation. But I really like the idea of offensive line. But to me, the targets in the trade down, if you're in the teens, are about the same as the targets that you have at 9. Is one of the corners there. Surtain, Horn, and
Caleb Farley.
Caleb Farley, there's the other one. And then you look at the linebackers, JOK, Parsons. Out of those 5, somebody's going to be there at 15. 100%. Somebody's going to be there at 18 probably.
100%.
I think that there's going to be a lot of good options down there.
That's why for me it's still corner. Again, you've collected all this capital for the future, and now maybe JC Horn is around.
Yep.
And in the same way that I mentioned in our last video that I was having like a great Justin Fields week, I'm having a great JC Horn week. The athleticism is so exciting. A lot of people, it hasn't been talked about as much because it's not the same position, but he also has the NFL pedigree, of course, with Joe Horn being his dad. So there is so much to be excited about there, but maybe he's going earlier. There's plenty to be excited about Surtain. There's plenty to be excited about Caleb Farley. It's the one position.
Farley could be this year's Jeffrey Simmons. We just went through that. He was 1 pick ahead of Noah Fant. Looks like a future stud. Would have been a top 10 pick. Gets injured, so that hurt his stock. Caleb Farley, exact same situation.
I've seen mocks with him going in the 2nd round, too. It's not like you need a race to get to Caleb Farley. You might. You don't know what's going to wind up happening, but the point is I think there's going to be good players late. And on top of that, I think that Najee Harris should be a consideration. I think he's more so of a consideration if you wind up getting somehow like 2 firsts in this draft, which when you look through the draft board, I'm not sure how that happens, but there could be multiple trade downs, whatever. I will say that running backs room is a very clear place where you can upgrade. We talked about the offensive line at the same time. there's a good chance that they have 5 good starters there with Juwan James, with everybody. You look at the receivers, you don't really need to add anybody. If you're rolling with Drew, you're rolling with Drew. Tight end, you can go through all the positions and say, you have a bottom half of the NFL running backs room. Mm-hmm. You've got Melvin Gordon, who's not going to be here forever. And when he's gone, you're going to be left with what? A need to draft a guy early. Why not just get ahead of this? Go get a Najee Harris, a guy who can do everything, can run routes, can catch the ball. Because when you look at the Broncos roster, I think that they can afford a luxury pick if they want to.
There's people, the anti-running back crowd banging their head against the wall.
What would you say about Alvin Kamara, Christian
Mm-hmm.
McCaffrey, those types? That's who Najee is. He caught 43 passes last year.
I think it's Kareem Hunt, but I mean, hey, that's another pick that would really help Drew.
Okay, last thing here. If the Broncos trade back, who do they get? And I'll let you pick the position, the slot they trade back to, and the player they take.
They trade back with Washington at 19, and they end up selecting Eric Stokes, cornerback out of Georgia.
Wow, a name that had not been mentioned this entire video.
That's right.
I'm I'm gonna disappoint myself just because it tends to happen in Broncos drafts. Not last year, Jerry.
I thought you were just gonna say it tends to happen in your life.
Yeah, I think you could say that. I think that would be fair. I'm gonna say they go back to 15. They give the Patriots Justin Fields or Trey Lance.
I hate it.
And they take JOK at 15.
Yeah,
wow, that would be just really nerve-wracking, right? Yeah. It's like you pass up your chance to get one of these guys, and now there's just going to be a massive microscope on that player, and Drew Lock gets even bigger. That would be very nerve-wracking.
Yeah, that'd be rough.
I'll say they trade back to, is it 20 with the Bears?
Yeah.
And they take J.C. Horn.
Love it.
It's a good one.
All right, we've got one more of these coming your guys' way, so make sure you stay tuned. And if you enjoyed this one, hit us with a like.